In a stunning 2024 interview that sent shockwaves through the sporting community, seven-time world champion Sir Lewis Hamilton made an admission that no one saw coming. "I had no one to talk to as a teenager. I was winning races and living what everyone thought was the perfect life, but inside, I was drowning in depression." For the first time in his extraordinary career, the man who conquered Formula One revealed the secret battle that nearly destroyed him before he ever reached the pinnacle of motorsport. Behind the trophies, the fame, and the historic achievements lay a story of profound loneliness, crippling anxiety, and a young man's desperate fight for his mental health. This is that untold story, from a 12-year-old boy crying alone after his first major victory to a teenager having panic attacks before races. Lewis Hamilton's journey to greatness was shadowed by struggles that would have broken most people. But it was also a journey toward healing, hope, and ultimately using his platform to save others from the darkness he once knew. What you're about to read isn't just the story of a racing champion. It's the story of a human being's courage to seek help, find healing, and transform his pain into purpose. The story begins in 1997, in a small bedroom in Stevenage, where a lonely 12-year-old stared at a poster of his hero and wondered why winning felt so empty. Lewis Hamilton stared at the poster on his bedroom wall. Ayrton Senna's yellow helmet gleamed under the dim light from his small desk lamp. The Brazilian driver's eyes seemed to look right through him, like they knew all his secrets. One day, Lewis whispered to the poster, "One day I'll be like you." But tonight, that dream felt far away, very far away. His RC car lay in pieces on the carpet. The motor had burned out during practice at the local park. Lewis had been trying to make it go faster, just like real racing drivers did with their cars. But now it was broken, and they didn't have money to fix it. Lewis picked up a small plastic wheel and rolled it between his fingers. Everything always came down to money. His dad, Anthony, worked 2 jobs to pay for Lewis's karting. His stepmother, Linda, helped when she could. But there was never enough. From downstairs came the sound of raised voices. His parents were fighting again. Lewis couldn't hear the exact words, but he knew what it was about. It was always about money. "We can't keep doing this." Tony, his stepmother's voice drifted up through the thin walls. "The mortgage is due next week." "I know, Linda, but this is his dream. Our dream. Dreams don't pay bills." Lewis pulled his pillow over his head, but the voices still came through. He felt that familiar weight in his chest, the heavy feeling that made it hard to breathe sometimes, the feeling that everything was his fault. If he wasn't racing, Dad wouldn't work so hard. If he wasn't racing, they'd have money for normal things. If he wasn't racing, maybe his real mom, Carmen, would visit more often. Carmen lived far away now. She called sometimes, but not very much anymore. When she did call, Lewis never knew what to say. How could he tell her about school? About racing? About feeling different from everyone else? At school, Lewis was the only kid who looked like him in most of his classes. His skin was darker than most of the other children. His hair was different. Sometimes kids whispered things behind his back. They didn't always say mean things, but they noticed he was different. And being noticed for being different never felt good. His teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was nice enough. But even she seemed surprised when Lewis got good grades in math and science. Like she expected him to be slow or something. "Lewis is very bright," she had told his parents during the last meeting. She said it like it was unexpected. Like being smart and looking like Lewis didn't go together. The karting track. Things were different, but also the same. Lewis was fast. Really fast. Faster than kids who had been racing longer. Faster than kids whose families had lots of money for the best equipment. But even at Rye House, the local track where he practiced, Lewis often felt alone. The other families had matching team uniforms and big trucks to carry their carts. They had mechanics and spare parts and fancy tires. Lewis had his dad's old van and whatever used parts they could afford. Anthony worked on their cart in the garage at night after his regular job. Lewis helped by holding tools and learning how engines worked. "Racing isn't about having the most money," Anthony always said. "It's about having the most heart." Lewis wanted to believe that. But it was hard when other kids had everything, and he had to make do with so little. Tomorrow was the big race at Hodgston. Lewis had been preparing for weeks. If he won, it would be his first real championship. Not just a local race, but something important. Something that might help him move up to better racing. But tonight, Lying in his small bedroom with his broken RC car and his parents fighting downstairs, Lewis wasn't thinking about winning. He was thinking about losing, about disappointing everyone who believed in him. He reached under his mattress and pulled out a notebook. It was just a regular school notebook, but Lewis used it as his journal. Nobody knew about it. Not his dad, not Linda, not even his best friend Marcus at school. Lewis opened the notebook and picked up a pencil. He started to write, "Everyone thinks racing will make me happy. Dad works so hard to pay for it. Linda tries to help even though I'm not really her son. The other kids at school think I'm lucky to do something cool like racing. But what if it doesn't make me happy? What if I'm not good enough? What if I am good enough, but it still feels empty inside? Sometimes I wonder if everyone would be better off if I just quit. Then Dad could stop working so hard. Then they could use the money for normal things like other families that I don't know why I feel so sad all the time. I should be happy. I get to race cars. I'm pretty good at school. I have a family that loves me, but I feel alone. Really alone. Like nobody understands what it's like to be me." Lewis closed the notebook and slid it back under his mattress. The voices downstairs had stopped. Maybe his parents had worked things out. Maybe they had just gone to bed tired, like they did most nights. He looked at Ayrton Senna's poster again. The great Brazilian driver had died when Lewis was just 9 years old. Lewis remembered watching it on TV with his dad. Anthony had cried, which was scary because Lewis had never seen his father cry before. He was the best, Anthony had said. And now he's gone. Lewis wondered if Senna had ever felt alone, if he had ever worried about money or felt different from everyone else. Probably not. Champions didn't have problems like that, did they? The house was quiet now. Lewis turned off his desk lamp and laid down in the darkness. Tomorrow was the big race. He needed to sleep. He needed to be ready, but sleep didn't come easy. It never did on nights like this, when the weight of everyone's dreams felt too heavy to carry. Race day at Hodgston, the sun was shining when Lewis woke up. That was a good sign. Rain made racing harder, especially on tracks he didn't know very well. Anthony was already loading the cart into their van when Lewis came downstairs. His dad looked tired but excited. Linda made Lewis eat breakfast even though his stomach felt nervous. "You're going to do great today," she said, ruffling his hair. "I can feel it." The drive to Hodgston took about an hour. Lewis sat in the back of the van with his helmet and racing suit. He tried to picture the track in his mind, remembering the corners from when they had practiced there a few weeks ago. When they arrived, Lewis saw all the other teams setting up. Fancy trucks, professional-looking mechanics, drivers with expensive gear. For a moment, that heavy feeling came back. The feeling that he didn't belong here. But then Anthony put a hand on his shoulder. "Remember what I taught you," his dad said. "It's not about the equipment. It's about the driver." Lewis nodded and started getting ready. He put on his racing suit and helmet. He checked the cart one more time with his father. Everything looked good. The other drivers were stretching and talking with their families. Lewis noticed a few of them looking at him. He was used to being the only driver who looked like him at most races. It used to bother him more, but now he tried not to think about it. Lewis Hamilton to the grid. Came the announcement over the loudspeaker. This was it. The race he had been preparing for all season. The race that could change everything. Lewis climbed into his cart and started the engine. The familiar sound and vibration made him feel better. This was where he belonged. Behind the wheel, going fast, racing, the green flag dropped and Lewis shot forward. He was in third place after the first corner. Not bad, but not great either. He needed to move up. Lap after lap, Lewis found his rhythm. He passed the driver. In second place on the inside of a tight corner. Now he was behind the leader, a boy named Jamie whose family had one of the biggest trucks in the paddock. With 5 laps to go, Lewis saw his chance. Jamie made a small mistake coming out of a corner. Lewis was right behind him. This was his moment. Lewis pulled alongside Jamie on the main straight. They were side by side, racing toward the next corner at top speed. Lewis had the inside line. He braked later than he ever had before, trusting his instincts and his courage that he made the pass. The crowd cheered as Lewis crossed the finish line in first place. He had won his first real championship. The dream he had worked so hard for had come true. Anthony ran onto the track, lifting Lewis out of the cart and spinning him around. Other people congratulated him. Someone put a trophy in his hands. Cameras flashed. Lewis smiled for the pictures. He said the right things to the reporters. He thanked his father and his sponsors. He acted like a champion should act, but inside, something felt wrong. After all the interviews and photos, Lewis sat alone in his cart. Everyone else was packing up or celebrating somewhere else. He looked down at the trophy in his hands. This was supposed to be the happiest moment of his life. He had won. He had beaten drivers with better equipment and more money. He had proved that Anthony was right about heart being more important than anything else. So why did he feel so empty inside? Tears started running down his face. Lewis didn't understand why he was crying. Champions didn't cry after winning, did they? What was wrong with him? He looked around to make sure nobody was watching. The last thing he needed was for people to see him crying after his biggest victory. From across the paddock, Lewis noticed someone watching him. A man in simple clothes, not like the fancy team uniforms everyone else wore. The man had kind eyes and seemed to understand that Lewis was struggling, even though they had never met. But before Lewis could think more about the stranger, Anthony appeared with a huge smile on his face. "There's my champion," his father said. "Ready to go home and celebrate?" Lewis quickly wiped his tears and forced a smile. "Yeah, Dad. Let's go home." As they loaded the cart and trophy into their van, Lewis looked back once more. The strange man was still there, still watching with those understanding eyes. Then Lewis climbed into the van, and they drove away. That night, Lewis wrote in his journal, "I won today. Everyone says I should be happy, but I feel more alone than ever. Why does winning feel so lonely? What's wrong with me?" There was a man at the track who seemed to see that I wasn't really okay. I wonder who he was. I wonder if he knows what it's like to feel empty even when you're supposed to be happy. Lewis closed the notebook and hid it under his mattress. Tomorrow, everyone would still be talking about his big win. But tonight, he just felt lost, outside. His window, the poster of Ayrton Senna, seemed to be watching him. Those eyes full of understanding that Lewis desperately wished he could find in real life. 2 years had passed since that strange day at Hodgston. Lewis was now 14, taller and faster than ever before. His bedroom wall had more trophies, and his reputation in junior karting was growing. Everyone called him the next big thing in British motorsport, but the heavy feeling in his chest had not gone away. If anything, it had gotten worse. Lewis sat at his desk at John Henry Newman School, staring at a math test he should have finished 10 minutes ago. The numbers blurred together on the page. He knew the answers. Math had always been easy for him. But lately, concentrating on anything felt impossible. 5 more minutes, announced Mr. Davies, their teacher. Lewis quickly filled in the remaining answers and handed in his paper. He knew he had made mistakes, simple ones that he never would have made before. His grades were slipping, and he could see the concern in his teacher's eyes. "Lewis, can you stay after class, please?" Mr. Davies asked as the bell rang that Lewis's stomach tightened. He nodded and waited while the other students filed out, their voices echoing down the hallway about weekend plans and who was dating whom. Normal teenager things that Lewis felt completely disconnected from. "Is everything all right at home?" Mr. Davies asked once they were alone. "Your work has been different lately." Lewis shrugged. "Everything's fine, just tired from racing." It was the excuse he always gave. Racing was demanding, everyone knew that. It was easier than explaining the real problem, that getting out of bed each morning felt like climbing a mountain, or that food had stopped tasting good, or that he often forgot what people had just said to him. Mr. Davies studied Lewis's face. For a moment. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm fine," Lewis said quickly. "Really?" He grabbed his bag and headed for the door. Mr. Davies meant well, but Lewis couldn't risk anyone finding out how he really felt. Weakness wasn't allowed in racing. Weakness wasn't allowed anywhere. Really. In the hallway, Lewis found Marcus Chun waiting by his locker. Marcus was probably his only real friend at school, a quiet kid who loved computers and science fiction. Movies. He didn't care about racing or popularity or any of the things that seemed to matter to everyone else. "Ready for lunch?" Marcus asked, adjusting his thick glasses. Lewis nodded, and they walked to the cafeteria together. The lunchroom was always loud and crowded. Different groups sat at different tables: the popular kids, the athletes, the smart kids, the ones who didn't fit anywhere. Lewis and Marcus usually sat at a table near the windows, away from most of the noise. Today, Marcus unpacked his lunch while talking about a new computer program he was learning. Lewis picked at his sandwich, but barely ate anything. "You okay, mate?" Marcus asked, noticing Lewis had barely touched his food. You've been really quiet lately. Lewis looked up at his friend's concerned face. Marcus had always been good at noticing things other people missed. It was one of the things Lewis liked about him, but also one of the things that made him nervous. Just thinking about the race this weekend, Lewis said. Big one coming up. It wasn't exactly a lie. The British Cadet Championship was this weekend, and it was important. But that wasn't why Lewis felt like there was a stone in his stomach. The stone had been there for months now, making everything taste like cardboard. You always win those things, Marcus said with a smile. You're like some kind of racing robot. Lewis forced a laugh. Yeah, maybe. But inside, he felt anything but robotic. He felt broken, like all his parts were coming loose, and he was barely holding himself together. That evening at home, Lewis could hear Anthony on the phone in the kitchen. His father's voice was stressed, the way it got when he talked to people about money. I understand the payment is late, Anthony was saying, but I can get it to you by next Friday. I promise. Lewis closed his bedroom door and sat on his bed. Through the thin walls, he could still hear his father trying to work out payment plans with someone, probably the mechanic who had worked on their kart engine last month. The guilt felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. All of this stress, all of these money problems, were because of him, because of his racing, because of his dreams. Lewis pulled out his journal and started writing. If I don't make it to Formula One, Dad will lose everything because of me. He works double shifts at the factory just to pay for racing. I heard him on the phone with the bank yesterday. We might lose the house. Everyone at school thinks I'm so lucky to be a racing driver. They don't know that every trophy costs money we don't have. They don't know that Dad hasn't bought new clothes for himself in 2 years. What if I'm not good enough? What if all this sacrifice is for nothing? I feel guilty all the time. Guilty for costing so much money. Guilty for making Dad work so hard. Guilty for not being happier when I should be grateful. Sometimes I wish I had never started racing. Then maybe Dad wouldn't look so tired all the time. Lewis closed the journal and hid it under his mattress. The Ayrton Senna poster stared down at him from the wall. Senna had been poor when he started racing too, but he had made it to Formula One. He had become world champion 3 times before his accident. What would you do? Lewis whispered to the poster, but the paper eyes couldn't answer. The call that changed everything 3 days later. Lewis was eating breakfast when the phone rang. Anthony answered it, and Lewis watched his father's face change from tired to surprised, to excited. Yes, he's here, Anthony said into the phone. Yes, we can meet with you. When Anthony hung up, he turned to Lewis with the biggest smile Lewis had seen in months. That was McLaren, his father said. They want to meet with you. About their young driver program. Lewis felt his heart start racing. McLaren was one of the biggest teams in Formula One. Their young driver program was legendary. It was how drivers got discovered and moved up to the top levels of motorsport. Are you serious? Lewis asked. Dead serious, Anthony replied. They saw you race last weekend at the British Grand Prix karting event. They want to talk to us about your future. Lewis should have been jumping up and down. This was the moment every young racing driver dreamed of. The moment when professional teams started paying attention. But instead of excitement, Lewis felt a familiar tightness in his chest. More pressure, more expectations, more ways to disappoint everyone. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at McLaren's headquarters in Woking. Lewis had driven past the building before with his father, but he had never imagined going inside as anything other than a tourist to AT school that week. Word got around about the McLaren meeting. Other students started treating Lewis differently, some with more respect, others with jealousy. Teachers mentioned it in class, as if his racing success somehow made him a better student than his slipping grades suggested. That's amazing, Lewis, Marcus said when he heard the news. You must be so excited. Yeah, Lewis replied. Excited. But that night, lying in bed, Lewis felt anything but excited. He felt scared, terrified actually. What if McLaren saw through him? What if they realized he wasn't as confident as everyone thought? What if they could see the sadness he worked so hard to hide? The meeting day arrived gray and rainy. Anthony wore his best suit, the one he had gotten married in years ago. Lewis put on the only dress shirt he owned and tried to look professional. McLaren's headquarters looked like something from the future. Glass and steel and racing cars displayed, like works of art. Lewis had never been anywhere so impressive. Ron Dennis, The team's boss, shook Lewis's hand and looked directly into his eyes. "You could be our future world champion," he said simply. Everyone in the room, Anthony, the other, McLaren executives, even Lewis himself, expected him to smile and say something confident. This was every racing driver's dream moment. Instead, Lewis felt like he couldn't breathe. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "I'll do my best." They talked for an hour about racing, about Lewis's future, about what it would take to climb the ladder to Formula One. Lewis gave the right answers and asked good questions. He played the part of a confident young driver perfectly, but inside, panic was growing. His heart was beating too fast. His hands were sweating. The room felt too small and too bright. Somehow, he made it through the meeting. They offered him a place in the young driver program, a dream come true for any 14-year-old kart racer. On the drive home, Anthony was happier than Lewis had seen him in years. "This is it, son," Anthony said. "This is what we've been working toward. McLaren, can you believe it?" Lewis nodded and smiled, but he felt disconnected from his own body, like he was watching someone else's life happen. That night, he had his first panic attack. Lewis was lying in bed, trying to process what had happened at McLaren, when suddenly he couldn't catch his breath. His chest felt tight, like someone was sitting on it. His heart was racing so fast he thought it might explode. He sat up, gasping for air. The room felt like it was spinning. His hands were shaking, and he was covered in sweat even though he wasn't hot. "I'm dying," he thought. "Something's wrong with my heart." Lewis stumbled to the bathroom and splashed cold water on his face. Slowly, very slowly, his breathing began to return to normal. His heart stopped racing. The room stopped spinning. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. His face was pale and his eyes looked scared, really scared. "What's happening to me?" he whispered to his reflection. Lewis went back to his bedroom and pulled out his journal. His hands were still shaking as he wrote, "Something is really wrong with me. I should be happy about McLaren, but I feel terrified instead. I had some kind of attack tonight. I thought I was going to die. Everyone expects me to be excited about my future, but all I can think about is how many ways I might fail. What if I'm not good enough for McLaren? What if I embarrass Dad and myself? I don't understand why winning races and getting opportunities makes me feel worse instead of better. I must be broken somehow. I wish I could talk to someone about this, but who would understand? Everyone thinks my life is perfect." Lewis closed the journal and looked up at his Ayrton Senna poster. The Brazilian champion gazed back with those knowing eyes, as if he understood something about pressure and fear that Lewis was only beginning to discover. Outside his window, the night was quiet. Most 14-year-olds were probably sleeping peacefully, dreaming normal teenager dreams. But Lewis lay awake until dawn, afraid to close his eyes in case the scary feelings came back. The next morning, he put on his mask again. The smile, the confidence, the excitement about his racing future that everyone expected to see. But underneath the mask, Lewis Hamilton was drowning. 5 years had passed since that terrifying night when Lewis first couldn't breathe. Now 18 years. Old and racing in Formula Renault, Lewis had learned to hide his panic attacks better. Most people never saw them coming. The hotel room in Silverstone was small and clean, like all the racing circuit hotels. Lewis sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. He should call his father to talk about tomorrow's race. He should review his notes about the track. He should eat something. Instead, he felt that familiar heaviness creeping over him like a dark cloud. Lewis was living away from home now, traveling from race to race across Europe. Other drivers his age seemed to love the freedom. They made friends easily, went out to dinner together, laughed about things that happened during practice. But Lewis felt more alone than ever. His teammates, Jake Morrison and Tom Bradley, were nice enough guys. They invited him to join them sometimes when they explored whatever city they were racing in. But Lewis always found excuses to stay in his room. "You're missing out, Hamilton," Jake had said just last week in Germany. "There's a whole world out there beyond the racetrack." Lewis had smiled and made a joke about needing his beauty sleep. Jake laughed and didn't push it. Nobody ever pushed it. They all assumed Lewis was just focused on racing. The truth was more complicated. Lewis was afraid that if he spent too much time around other people, they might notice something was wrong with him. They might see through the confident young driver act he had perfected over the years. Lewis picked up his journal from the bedside table. It was his fourth journal now. He had filled up 3 others with his thoughts over the years. This one was small and black, easy to hide in his racing bag that he opened it and started writing. Another race weekend. Another chance to prove I belong. Here. But I feel like I'm living someone else's life. The other drivers seem so happy. They joke around and make friends and act like normal teenagers. I watch them and wonder what's wrong with me. Why can't I be like that? Everyone sees the helmets and trophies. No one sees me crying in hotel rooms. No one asks if I'm okay. Maybe if I was gone, it would be easier for everyone. Lewis stopped writing and stared at those last words. They scared him, but he had been thinking them more and more lately. Not seriously, not like he had actual plans, but just wondering sometimes if everyone would be better off without him. The pressure from McLaren was enormous. They expected results. They expected him to win races and climb the ladder toward Formula One quickly. Ron Dennis had invested in Lewis's future, and that investment needed to pay off. Lewis's phone buzzed with a text from Anthony. "Good luck tomorrow, son. Remember, you belong there." Lewis smiled sadly at the message. His father believed in him completely. Anthony had sacrificed everything for Lewis's racing career, working double shifts, borrowing money, even selling the family car to buy racing equipment. That made the dark thoughts even worse. How could Lewis even think about giving up when his father had given so much? Another text came in, this one from his girlfriend, Sarah Chun, Marcus's older sister whom Lewis had started dating 6 months ago. Sarah was studying medicine at university and was incredibly smart and kind. "Thinking of you tonight. You've got this." Red heart. Lewis stared at the heart emoji. Sarah cared about him, he knew that. But even with her, he couldn't talk about the real stuff. The panic attacks that sometimes hit him before races. The nights when he couldn't sleep because his brain wouldn't stop racing. The constant feeling that he was disappointing everyone. How could he tell someone as together as Sarah that he sometimes felt like he was falling apart? Lewis put his phone on silent and tried to focus on tomorrow's race. Formula Renault was competitive, filled with other young drivers who also dreamed of reaching Formula One. Everyone was talented. Everyone was hungry, but Lewis felt different from them in ways that had nothing to do with racing ability. Race day crisis. The next morning at Silverstone, Lewis went through his usual pre-race routine. Physical warm-up, mental preparation, checking the car with his engineer. Everything looked perfect, but as Lewis sat in his car waiting for the race to start, something felt wrong. His heart was beating too fast. His hands were sweating inside his gloves. The familiar tightness was building in his chest. "Not now," he whispered to himself. "Please not now." The panic attack hit just as the safety car pulled off the track. Lewis's vision began to blur. His breathing became shallow and quick. The steering wheel felt slippery in his hands. Somehow, he made it through the first few corners. But by lap 3, Lewis knew he was in trouble. He couldn't concentrate on the racing line. He couldn't judge braking points properly. Other cars were passing him easily. "Lewis, what's happening out there?" came his engineer's voice through the radio. "You're losing time every lap." Lewis couldn't answer. He could barely think. All he could do was try to keep the car on the track and hope the panic would pass. On lap 7, Lewis made a mistake coming into a fast corner. The car slid wide, and he had to fight to keep it from spinning. He managed to save it, but he was now running last in the race. "Box, box, box," came the radio call. "Bring the car in." Lewis was grateful for the excuse to stop racing. He drove slowly to the pits, his hands still shaking on the steering wheel. "What happened out there?" his race engineer asked when Lewis climbed out of the car. "Did you have a mechanical problem?" I don't know," Lewis said. Something felt wrong. The team checked the car thoroughly but found nothing wrong with it. Lewis sat in a corner of the garage, still trying to calm his breathing. His first DNF did not finish in Formula Renault, and it wasn't because of car trouble. It was because of him. After the race, Lewis walked alone through the paddock. Other drivers and teams were celebrating or analyzing their results. Lewis just wanted to disappear. That's when he saw him, the same man from all those years ago at Hodgston. Older now, with gray hair, but the same kind eyes. The same understanding expression. The man was standing near the medical center, wearing simple clothes that marked him as someone not involved with any racing team. When he saw Lewis, he walked over slowly. "Hello, Lewis," the man said gently. "I'm Father Michael. I've been following your career for a while now." Lewis looked at him suspiciously. Are you a reporter? Father Michael smiled. No, nothing like that. I'm a chaplain. I work with young athletes who are struggling with pressure. I'm not struggling, Lewis said quickly. Today was just a bad race. It happens. Father Michael nodded. Of course, bad races do happen, but sometimes they happen for reasons that have nothing to do with driving ability. Lewis felt exposed, like this stranger could see right through him. I should go? My team is probably looking for me. Lewis, Father Michael said as Lewis started to walk away. Sometimes the fastest drivers are running from something. Lewis stopped, but didn't. Turn around. If you ever want to talk to someone who won't judge you, Father Michael continued. Someone who has seen what pressure can do to young people. I'm usually around the British racing circuits. Lewis walked away without responding, but Father Michael's words echoed in his head for the rest of the day. That night in his hotel room, Lewis called his mother Carmen for the first time in months. She answered on the third ring, sounding surprised to hear from him. Lewis, is everything okay? And suddenly, sitting alone in that small hotel room, Lewis couldn't hold it together anymore. All the pressure, all the loneliness, all the fear came pouring out. Mom, he said, his voice breaking. I don't think I'm okay. Carmen was quiet for a moment. What do you mean, sweetheart? I feel lost, Lewis said, tears streaming down his face. Everyone thinks I should be happy because I'm racing and winning, but I feel so alone all the time. I had a panic attack during the race today. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Oh, Lewis, Carmen said softly. Why didn't you tell me you were feeling this way? I didn't know how to, Lewis admitted. I thought if I just kept winning races, it would go away. But it's getting worse. They talked for an hour. Carmen tried to comfort him, but Lewis could tell she didn't fully understand what he was going through. She lived far away and had her own struggles with their family situation. She cared about him, but she couldn't fix what was wrong. After hanging up, Lewis opened his journal and wrote, I told Mom how I really feel. It helped a little to say it out loud, but I still feel broken inside. There was a man at the track today who seemed to understand. He said something about fast drivers running from things. Maybe he knows what's wrong with me, that I'm scared that this feeling will never go away. I'm scared that I'll never be truly happy. Even if I make it to Formula One, everyone else seems to know how to be a normal person. I feel like I'm pretending all the time. Lewis closed the journal and looked out his hotel window at the Silverstone circuit. Tomorrow he would put his mask back on. He would smile and answer questions about the race and pretend that everything was fine. But underneath it all, Lewis Hamilton was still drowning, and he was beginning to realize that he might need help to reach the surface. The problem was, he didn't know how to ask for it. 2 years had passed since Lewis's breakdown at Silverstone. Now 20 years old, he was dominating Formula 3 like no driver before him. The racing world was buzzing with excitement about McLaren's next big star, but the buzzing in Lewis's head was getting louder too. Standing on the podium at Brands Hatch, Lewis held the Formula 3 championship trophy high above his head. Camera flashes lit up the evening sky like lightning. The crowd cheered his name. Champagne sprayed everywhere, and Lewis smiled the perfect smile he had practiced for years. Lewis, how does it feel to be champion? Shouted reporters from below the podium. It's amazing, Lewis called back, his voice carrying across the crowd. This is what dreams are made of. The crowd cheered louder. Lewis waved and pointed to his father Anthony in the crowd. His dad was crying happy tears, and Lewis felt a stab of guilt in his chest. Anthony deserved to have a son who was truly happy about this moment. But as Lewis stood there holding the trophy, surrounded by people celebrating his success, he felt completely alone. I should be happy, he thought, looking out at all the faces. This is what I've worked my whole life for. Why do I feel so empty? The championship ceremony seemed to last forever. More photos, more interviews, more congratulations from people Lewis barely knew. Everyone wanted to shake hands with the new Formula 3 champion. Everyone wanted to be part of his success. Lewis played his part perfectly. He said all the right things about hard work and dedication. He thanked his team and his family. He talked about his dreams of reaching Formula 1. But inside, he felt like he was watching someone else's life happen. Finally, after what felt like hours, the official celebrations ended. Teams began packing up their equipment. Fans slowly left the circuit. The noise and excitement faded into the quiet evening air, Lewis found himself alone near the McLaren hospitality unit, still wearing his racing suit with the championship #1 on it. He sat down on a stack of tire barriers and stared out at the empty track. This should be the happiest day of his life. He was 20 years old and had just won the most important junior racing championship in Europe. Formula One teams around the world were watching him. His future looked brighter than ever did. Oh, why did he feel like crying? Congratulations. Lewis looked up to see Father Michael walking toward him. The chaplain looked exactly the same as he had 2 years ago at Silverstone. Calm, kind, and somehow not surprised to find Lewis sitting alone after his biggest victory. Thank you, Lewis said quietly. Father Michael gestured to the space beside Lewis on the tire barrier. Mind if I sit? Lewis shrugged, and Father Michael settled down next to him. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the racing circuit. Everyone keeps congratulating me, Lewis finally said. I don't feel like I deserve it. Why not? Father Michael asked gently. Lewis was quiet for a long time. He had never talked about these feelings with anyone except his mother that one time, and even then he hadn't been completely honest. I feel like a fake, Lewis admitted. Everyone thinks I'm this confident, happy racing driver. But inside, I feel broken. Father Michael nodded. Depression doesn't care about your achievements, Lewis. It's not about deserving anything. There was that word again. Depression. Lewis had heard it before, but never thought it applied to him. Depressed people stayed in bed all day and couldn't function, right? They didn't win racing championships. I'm not depressed, Lewis said quickly. I mean, I race cars for a living. I'm living my dream. Are you? Father Michael asked. Living your dream? Lewis opened his mouth to say yes, of course he was. But the words wouldn't come. Because the truth was, even his dreams felt empty lately. I don't know, Lewis whispered. Father Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple business card. My name is Michael Thompson. I'm a chaplain, but I also work with young athletes who are struggling with pressure and mental health. If you ever want to talk to someone who won't judge you, call me. Lewis took the card and looked at it. Just a name and phone number. Nothing fancy. I'm not crazy, Lewis said. I never said you were, Father Michael replied. But you're in pain, and there's help available when you're ready for it. Before Lewis could respond, he heard Anthony calling his name from across the paddock. His father was walking toward them with a huge smile on his face. There's my champion, Anthony called out. Ready to go celebrate? Father Michael stood up and nodded to Lewis. Think about what I said, he said quietly, then walked away before Anthony reached them. Who was that? Anthony asked, looking at the retreating figure. Just someone congratulating me, Lewis said, slipping the business card into his pocket. Anthony put his arm around Lewis's shoulders. I'm so proud of you. Son, your mother would be proud too. Lewis forced another smile. Thanks, Dad. They walked toward the car park together, Anthony talking excitedly about Lewis's future, about Formula One possibilities, about all the dreams that were finally coming true. But Lewis barely heard him. His mind was stuck on Father Michael's question. Are you living your dream? That night back in his small apartment in Woking, Lewis sat at his desk with his journal open in front of him. The Formula 3 championship trophy sat on his shelf, gleaming under the desk lamp. It should have made him feel proud. Instead, it felt like evidence of how good he had become at pretending. Lewis began to write, I won the championship today. Everyone says I should be on top of the world, but I feel more lost than ever. There was a man at the track who said I might be depressed. I don't want to believe that. Depressed people don't achieve their goals, do they? They don't become racing champions. But what if he's right? What if this empty feeling inside isn't normal? What if other people don't feel like they're drowning even when everything looks perfect from the outside? I look at the trophy and I feel nothing. I should feel proud, excited, happy. Instead, I just feel tired. So tired of pretending to be okay when I'm not. The man gave me his card. Maybe I should call him. But what if people find out? What if McLaren thinks I'm weak? What if it ruins everything Dad has worked for? I don't know what to do anymore, Lewis closed the journal and picked up Father Michael's business card. He stared at the phone number for a long time. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Saw the race on TV. So proud of you. You looked amazing on the podium. Red heart, Lewis smiled sadly. Even his girlfriend, who knew him better than most people, couldn't see through his mask. He had become so good at acting happy that everyone believed it. Another text came in, this one from Marcus. Formula 3 champion. Next stop Formula 1. Celebration drinks this weekend. Lewis set his phone aside without responding. The thought of celebrating made him feel exhausted that he looked at Father Michael's card again. The chaplain had seemed so calm, so understanding. Like he had seen this before and wasn't shocked or disappointed by it. Lewis picked up his phone and started to dial the number. Then he stopped and put the phone down. He picked it up again and dialed the first 3 digits. Then stopped again. What if he thinks I'm crazy? Lewis thought. What if he tells someone? What if this ruins everything? But sitting alone in his apartment, holding a championship trophy that felt meaningless, Lewis realized something that scared him more than any racing car ever had. What if he never called, and this feeling never went away? What if he spent his whole life pretending to be happy while drowning inside? Lewis looked at the phone number one more time. Then he carefully folded the card and put it in his wallet, right behind his racing license that he wasn't ready to call yet. But for the first time in years, Lewis Hamilton was thinking about asking for help. Outside his window, the lights of Woking twinkled in the darkness. Somewhere out there, other 20-year-olds were probably celebrating victories, falling in love, figuring out their lives. Lewis pulled out his journal one more time and wrote, "Maybe tomorrow I'll be brave enough to make the call. Maybe tomorrow I'll start trying to save myself. Tonight, I just need to survive until morning." Lewis closed the journal and looked at his championship trophy one more time. Tomorrow, people would expect him to be the happy, confident racing driver again. Tomorrow, he would put on his mask and play the part perfectly. But maybe, just maybe, tomorrow he would also take the first step toward becoming real again. The business card sat in his wallet like a lifeline he wasn't quite ready to grab yet, but at least now he knew it was there. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November 2006. Lewis was eating breakfast in his small apartment when his phone rang. The caller ID showed Ron Dennis's office number. Lewis's heart started racing before he even answered. "Lewis," came Ron Dennis's familiar voice. "Can you come to McLaren today? We need to talk." 2 hours later, Lewis sat in the same glass conference room where he had first met the McLaren team 7 years earlier. But this time felt different. This time, Ron Dennis was smiling in a way that made Lewis's stomach flip with nervous excitement. "We want you in Formula 1, Ron said simply. "Next year, as our second driver alongside Fernando Alonso." Lewis felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Formula 1, the pinnacle of motorsport, the dream every racing driver had since childhood. At 21, he would be the youngest British driver in F1 history, the first black driver in the sport. Lewis started, then stopped. He should be jumping up and down. He should be calling his father immediately. He should be the happiest person alive. Instead, he felt terrified. "It's a big step," Ron continued. "The media attention will be intense, the pressure enormous. But we believe you're ready." Lewis nodded and managed to say all the right things. He thanked Ron and the team. He promised to work harder than ever. He smiled and shook hands like a future Formula 1 driver should. But inside, panic was building like a storm. The news broke the next day. Lewis Hamilton 2 race in Formula 1 screamed headlines across British newspapers. His phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Racing websites wanted quotes. Everyone wanted a piece of the young driver who was about to make history. Lewis found himself doing interview after interview, explaining his journey from Stevenage to Formula 1. He told the story about his father working multiple jobs. He talked about his dreams and determination. He said all the things people wanted to hear, but with each interview, the mask felt heavier. "How does it feel to be the first black driver in Formula 1? Asked one reporter. "It's an honor," Lewis replied. "I hope I can inspire other young people from different backgrounds to chase their dreams." The truth was more complicated. Lewis was proud to break barriers, but he also felt the weight of representing an entire community. What if he failed? What if he wasn't good enough? What if he let everyone down? That night, Lewis called Sarah. They had been dating for over a year now, and she was one of the few people who seemed to see past the racing driver image. "I saw the news," Sarah said excitedly. "Formula 1. Lewis, this is incredible." "Yeah," Lewis said, trying to match her enthusiasm. "It's what I've always wanted." "You don't sound very excited," Sarah observed. "Are you okay?" Lewis hesitated. Sarah was smart and caring, but how could he explain that his dream coming true felt like a nightmare? How could he tell her that he was having panic attacks just thinking about the pressure he would face? "I'm just nervous," he said finally. "It's a big step." "Of course you're nervous," Sarah said gently. "But you've earned this, Lewis. You're going to be amazing." After hanging up, Lewis sat alone in his apartment. The Formula 3 championship trophy still sat on his shelf, but now it looked small compared to what lay ahead. Lewis pulled out his journal and started writing, "Formula 1. The dream I've had since I was a kid watching Ayrton Senna. I should be celebrating, but I feel sick with worry. Everyone expects so much from me now. The media keeps calling me the future of Formula 1 and a once-in-a-generation talent. What if they're wrong? What if I'm just a good junior driver who's about to be exposed? I'm scared that the panic attacks will get worse. What if I have one during a race? What if I crash? Formula 1 cars are so much faster and more dangerous than anything I've driven that I keep thinking about calling that chaplain, Father Michael. But I can't show any weakness now. Not when I'm about to become an F1 driver. Everyone is counting on me to be strong. Maybe once I start racing, the fear will go away. Maybe driving in Formula 1 will finally make me feel the way I'm supposed to feel." Preseason testing January 2007 brought Lewis's first taste of a Formula 1 car. The McLaren MP4-22 was sleek and silver, more beautiful and powerful than anything he had ever driven. But as Lewis walked through the paddock at the Circuit de Valencia for preseason testing, he felt more out of place than ever. Formula 1 was a different world. Everything was bigger, louder, more intense. Hundreds of journalists and photographers followed every move. Team motorhomes looked like spaceships. The budgets were enormous. Lewis met his teammate Fernando Alonso for the first time at the team briefing. Fernando was the defending world champion, confident and experienced. He was friendly enough, but Lewis could see the competitive fire in his eyes. "Welcome to Formula 1, Fernando said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's not like junior racing anymore." Lewis nodded. "I'm ready to learn." "Good," Fernando replied, "because everyone will be watching to see if you really belong here." That comment hit Lewis like a punch to the stomach. Fernando probably meant it as motivation, but all Lewis heard was doubt. Even his own teammate questioned whether he deserved his seat. Later that day, Lewis climbed into the Formula 1 car for the first time. The cockpit was tight and complex, with dozens of buttons and switches on the steering wheel. The engine behind him was incredibly powerful, like a controlled explosion waiting to happen as the car fired up for his first lap. Lewis felt his hands start to shake. His breathing became shallow. The familiar signs of a panic attack were building. "Not now," Lewis whispered to himself. "Please not now." He pulled out of the garage and onto the track, trying to focus on the driving. But as he accelerated down the main straight, hitting speeds he had never experienced before, panic overwhelmed him. Lewis managed to complete the lap, but barely. His times were slow, his driving sloppy. When he returned to the pits, his race engineer looked concerned. "Everything okay out there?" the engineer asked. "The car fell off to you?" "Yeah," Lewis lied. Something didn't feel right. That night, in his hotel room, Lewis had his worst breakdown yet. He sat on the bathroom floor, struggling to breathe, feeling like his heart might explode from his chest. For the first time since Father Michael had given him the business card months earlier, Lewis seriously thought about calling him. He pulled out his wallet and stared at the simple white card. But then he imagined trying to explain to McLaren why he needed to see a counselor. He imagined the media finding out that their new driver was having mental health problems. He imagined disappointing his father after all those years of sacrifice. Lewis put the card away and wrote in his journal instead, "Had a panic attack in the F1 car today. I can't let this happen again. Too many people are depending on me that I have to find a way to push through this. Champions don't have panic attacks. Champions don't need help. Maybe I'm just not strong enough for Formula 1. But even as he wrote those words, Lewis knew he was wrong about champions not needing help. He just didn't know how to admit that he was drowning. The next morning, Lewis put on his mask again and went back to the track. He drove better, posted decent times, and gave positive interviews to the press. But underneath it all, Lewis Hamilton was fighting a battle that had nothing to do with racing. A battle he was losing more each day, and Formula 1, the dream that was supposed to fix everything, was about to make it so much worse. March 18, 2007. Albert Park, Melbourne, Australia. Lewis Hamilton's Formula One debut. Lewis sat in his car on the starting grid, surrounded by the 21 other best drivers in the world. The Australian crowd was enormous. Over 100,000 people packed into the grandstands, all watching him. His heart was pounding so hard, he could hear it over the engine noise. "Radio check, Lewis," came his engineer's voice through the headset. "Copy," Lewis replied, trying to keep his voice steady. But inside his helmet, Lewis was fighting for control. His hands were sweating. His breathing was too quick. The familiar panic was building just minutes before the most important race of his life. "You belong here," he whispered to himself. "You've earned this." The formation lap began. Lewis followed the other cars around the track, testing his brakes and tires. Fernando was just ahead of him in the other McLaren. The two-time world champion looked calm and focused. Lewis envied that calmness more than anything. As they lined up for the start, Lewis closed his eyes for just a moment. He thought about his father Anthony, watching from the McLaren garage. He thought about all the sacrifices, all the years of working toward this moment. The 5 red lights appeared on the gantry above the track. 0.5 lights, 0.4 lights, 0.3 lights, 0.2 lights, 0.1 light. Lights out. Lewis got a perfect start. He shot forward as the field charged toward turn 1 at nearly 200 miles per hour. Cars surrounded him on all sides. This was Formula One racing, faster and more dangerous than anything he had ever experienced. But something magical happened. As Lewis settled into his rhythm, the panic began to fade. The fear transformed into focus. For the first time in months, his mind felt clear that he was racing. Really racing. And he was good at it. Lewis finished third in his debut race, a result that shocked the Formula One world. As he climbed out of his car in the Melbourne paddock, journalists and photographers mobbed him. "How does it feel to finish on the podium in your first race?" shouted one reporter. "Incredible," Lewis said, his smile genuine for once. "This is what I've dreamed of my whole life." For those few hours after the race, Lewis actually felt the happiness that everyone expected him to feel. Standing on the podium, champagne spraying everywhere, Lewis thought maybe Formula One really would fix what was wrong with him. Maybe racing at the highest level would finally make the darkness go away. The pressure builds as the season continued. The pressure became suffocating. The media attention was unlike anything Lewis had experienced. Every move was analyzed. Every word was recorded. British newspapers called him the savior of British racing and the future world champion. Television cameras followed him everywhere. Reporters wanted to know about his childhood, his family, his relationships. They asked about being the only black driver in Formula One, about the racism he faced, about representing his community. Lewis learned to give perfect answers to every question. He smiled for every photo. He signed every autograph. But the constant performance was exhausting. His friendship with Marcus became a lifeline during this period. Marcus worked in computer programming now and didn't care about Formula One fame. When Lewis called him, they talked about normal things, movies, books. Marcus's girlfriend. "You sound tired, mate," Marcus said during one of their late-night phone calls. "Are you sleeping okay?" Lewis was sitting in his Monaco hotel room after qualifying for the Monaco Grand Prix. It was past midnight, but he couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with thoughts about tomorrow's race, about championship points, about not disappointing McLaren. "I'm fine," Lewis said automatically. "Just focused on racing." "Lewis," Marcus said gently. "We've been friends since we were kids. I know when you're lying." Lewis was quiet for a long time. Marcus was the only person who had known him before the fame, before the pressure, before the mask became permanent. "Sometimes I feel like I'm drowning," Lewis admitted quietly. "Everyone thinks my life is perfect because I'm racing in Formula One, but I feel more alone now than ever." "Have you talked to anyone about this?" Marcus asked. Like a professional, Lewis thought about Father Michael's business card, still tucked in his wallet after all these months. "I can't," he said. "If people found out I was seeing a therapist or counselor, it would be over. They'd think I was weak." "That's not true," Marcus said. "Getting help takes strength, not weakness." But Lewis couldn't hear that. All he could think about was protecting his career, his father's investment, his team's faith in him. After hanging up with Marcus, Lewis tried to sleep. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw tomorrow's race. The narrow Monaco streets where one mistake could end everything. The expectations of millions of people watching around the world. Lewis got up and wrote in his journal, "Monaco tomorrow. The most famous race in Formula One. I should be excited, but I'm terrified. The media keeps calling me a rookie sensation. They don't know about the panic attacks. They don't know how hard it is to breathe sometimes when I'm putting on my helmet. Marcus thinks I should get help. But how can I risk everything I've worked for? What if McLaren finds out and decides I'm not mentally strong enough for Formula One? I feel like I'm living two lives. The confident racing driver everyone sees, and the scared, lonely person I really am." The Monaco crash race day in Monaco dawned gray and drizzly. The narrow street circuit was slippery and unforgiving. One small mistake would send a car straight into the barriers. During practice, Lewis was pushing hard to find speed when he lost control coming out of the swimming pool chicane. The car snapped sideways and hit the barriers hard, sending pieces of carbon fiber flying. Lewis sat in the wreckage for a moment, shaken. The crash wasn't serious. He was completely unhurt. But sitting there surrounded by broken race car parts, Lewis had a moment of clarity about how dangerous his sport was. In junior racing, crashes were scary but rarely life-threatening. In Formula One, drivers died. Not often, but it happened. Every time Lewis got in the car, there was a real chance he might not get out. That realization hit him harder than the crash itself. That night in his Monaco hotel room, Lewis stared at himself in the bathroom mirror. His reflection looked tired and scared. The confident rookie everyone talked about was nowhere to be seen. Lewis pulled out his phone and Father Michael's business card. For the first time since receiving it, he actually dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then Lewis hung up. "I can't," he said to his reflection. "Not yet." Instead, he called his mother Carmen. It was late in England, but she answered anyway. "Lewis, is everything okay?" And just like that time in Formula Renault, Lewis broke down. All the pressure, all the fear, all the loneliness came pouring out. "Mom, I don't think I can do this," he said through tears. "Everyone thinks I'm this strong, confident driver, but I'm falling apart inside." "Oh, sweetheart," Carmen said softly. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I'm supposed to be living my dream," Lewis said. "I'm in Formula One. I should be the happiest person alive, but I feel more lost than ever." They talked for over an hour. Carmen tried to comfort him, but Lewis could tell she was worried. She lived far away and had her own struggles. She wanted to help but didn't know how. After hanging up, Lewis wrote in his journal, "Crash today. Could have been worse, but it made me think about death, about how quickly everything could end." Called Mom again. "She tries to understand, but she can't fix what's wrong with me. Nobody can. I almost called that chaplain today. Almost asked for help. But I chickened out at the last second. I don't know how much longer I can keep pretending to be okay when I'm not." Lewis closed the journal and looked out his hotel window at the Monaco harbor. Expensive yachts bobbed in the water under the moonlight. Everything looked peaceful and beautiful. But inside his hotel room, Lewis Hamilton felt like he was drowning in the middle of paradise. The business card sat on his bedside table. Father Michael's phone number just 10 digits away from help. But Lewis still wasn't ready to admit he needed saving. By mid-2007, Lewis Hamilton was leading the Formula One World Championship. At 22 years old, he was on track to become the youngest world champion in history. The media called him the phenomenon, the future of Formula One, a once-in-a-generation talent. But Lewis felt like he was drowning in deeper water than ever before. The pressure from McLaren was enormous. Ron Dennis and the team expected him to win the championship in his first year, something that had never been done before. Anthony was proud but also stressed about managing his son's sudden fame. Sarah tried to be supportive, but she didn't understand why Lewis seemed so unhappy when everything was going perfectly. "You're living every racing driver's dream," she said during dinner at a fancy Monaco restaurant. "Why do you look so miserable?" Lewis pushed his food around his plate. Nothing tasted good anymore. "I'm not miserable," he said automatically, "just focused." But Sarah knew him well enough to see through that excuse. "Lewis, when was the last time you seemed truly happy? Not the fake smile you put on for cameras, but actually happy." Lewis couldn't remember. Maybe that day he won his first karting championship at Hodgston, before he understood what the victory would cost him. "I'm fine," he said, the words feeling hollow in his mouth. Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "You're not fine, and that's okay. But you can't keep pretending everything is perfect when it's not." That night, Lewis lay awake in his Monaco apartment staring at the ceiling. Outside, the Mediterranean Sea sparkled under the moonlight. Inside, Lewis felt like he was sinking into darkness. His phone buzzed with messages from journalists wanting interviews, from sponsors wanting appearances, from fans wanting autographs. Everyone wanted a piece of Lewis Hamilton, the racing driver. Nobody asked about Lewis Hamilton, the person. The Hungarian Grand Prix, July 29, 2007. The Hungaroring Circuit in Budapest. Lewis was leading the championship by 12 points, but the pressure was crushing. The morning of the race, Lewis sat in his driver's room at the circuit, trying to prepare mentally. But instead of visualizing racing lines and overtaking moves, all he could think about was failure. What if he made a mistake? What if he cost McLaren the championship? What if he proved that all the doubters were right, that he wasn't ready for this level of pressure? Lewis picked up his phone and scrolled through the racing news websites. Most of the articles were positive, but a few criticized his recent performances. One headline read, "Is Hamilton cracking under pressure?" That single sentence hit Lewis like a punch to the stomach. Because deep down, he knew it might be true. During the race, everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Lewis made an uncharacteristic mistake in qualifying that left him starting from the back of the grid. Then, during the race itself, he made another error that cost him crucial points as he climbed out of his car after finishing a disappointing 7th. The criticism was immediate. Television commentators questioned his mental strength. Newspapers suggested he wasn't ready for championship pressure. Online forums filled with people saying he had been exposed as not being good enough. "Tough day," said one reporter, shoving a microphone in Lewis's face. "Some people are saying this shows you're not ready for the pressure of a championship fight. What's your response?" Lewis forced his media smile and gave the standard answers about learning from mistakes and coming back stronger. But inside, each word of criticism felt like a knife wound. That night in his Budapest hotel room, Lewis had his worst breakdown yet. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, reading more criticism online, when the panic hit harder than ever before. His chest felt tight. His breathing became rapid and shallow. His heart was racing so fast he thought it might explode. But this time, the panic came with something new, a rage he had never felt before. Lewis stood up and punched the bathroom mirror as hard as he could. The glass shattered, cutting his hand. Blood dripped onto the white tile floor. Lewis stared at the broken reflection of his face, fractured into a dozen pieces. "What's wrong with me?" he shouted at the broken mirror. "Why can't I just be normal?" Lewis wrapped his bleeding hand in a towel and sat on the bathroom floor. For the first time since receiving Father Michael's business card over a year ago, he seriously considered calling for help. But then he imagined the headlines. Hamilton seeks therapy after breakdown. He imagined McLaren losing faith in him. He imagined his father's disappointment after all those years of sacrifice. Lewis pulled out his phone and called Marcus instead. "Lewis? It's late, mate. Everything okay? Can you come to Budapest?" Lewis asked, his voice shaking. "I need help." Marcus didn't ask questions. "I'll catch the next flight." "Are you hurt?" Lewis looked at his bandaged hand. "Not seriously. But Marcus, I think I'm broken." "You're not broken," Marcus said firmly. "You're struggling, and that's different. I'll be there tomorrow morning." After hanging up, Lewis wrote in his journal with his uninjured hand, "Hit rock bottom tonight. Literally punched a mirror and cut my hand. The pressure is too much. The criticism is too much. I can't do this anymore. Everyone expects me to be perfect. When I make mistakes, they say I'm cracking under pressure. Maybe they're right. Maybe I'm not strong enough for this. Marcus is coming. Maybe it's time to tell someone the truth about how bad this has gotten. I'm scared that if I admit I need help, everything will fall apart. But I'm also scared that if I don't get help, I'll fall apart anyway." Marcus arrives. Marcus flew to Budapest on the first flight he could find. When he arrived at Lewis's hotel room the next morning, he was shocked by what he saw. Lewis looked exhausted. His eyes were red from crying. His hand was bandaged, and there were cuts on his knuckles. The usually immaculate racing driver looked broken. "Jesus, Lewis," Marcus said, immediately hugging his friend. "What happened?" Lewis told him everything. About the years of panic attacks, about the constant feeling of emptiness even when he won races, about feeling like a fraud who was about to be exposed, about punching the mirror in frustration and fear. Marcus listened without judgment, the way he always had since they were kids. "Mate, you need professional help," Marcus said gently. "This isn't something you can handle alone." "I can't," Lewis said. "If anyone finds out." "Finds out what? That you're human?" Marcus interrupted. "Lewis, you're dealing with something real. Something that has nothing to do with how good you are at driving race cars." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm calling that chaplain you told me about. The one who gave you his card." "No," Lewis said quickly. "I'm not ready." "When will you be ready?" Marcus asked. "When you hurt yourself worse than a cut hand. When you crash a car because you're having a panic attack. When you—" Marcus stopped himself, but Lewis knew what he was thinking. "When you hurt yourself permanently." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Lewis walked to his suitcase and pulled out his wallet. Father Michael's business card was still there, worn and creased from being carried around for so long. "Maybe," Lewis said quietly, "I could just talk to him. Not as a patient. Just to see what he thinks." Marcus smiled. "That sounds like a good start." Lewis stared at the phone number on the card. 10 digits that could change everything. 10 digits that terrified him more than any racing car ever had. But for the first time in years, Lewis Hamilton was ready to admit something that scared him more than any race. He needed help to save himself, and maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Lewis stared at Father Michael's business card for what felt like hours. The phone number seemed to blur together as his hands shook slightly. Marcus sat quietly beside him on the hotel bed, not pushing but ready to support whatever decision Lewis made. "What if he thinks I'm crazy?" Lewis whispered. "What if he doesn't?" Marcus replied gently. Lewis took a deep breath and dialed the number. Before he could change his mind again, the phone rang twice before a calm voice answered. "Hello, this is Michael." This is Lewis Hamilton," Lewis said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You gave me your card a while ago. At Brands Hatch." "Lewis," Father Michael said warmly. "I'm so glad you called. How are you?" The simple question broke something inside Lewis. "I'm not okay," he admitted, tears starting to flow. "I'm really not okay." "Where are you right now?" Father Michael asked. "Budapest. At my hotel." "Are you alone?" Lewis looked at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. "My friend Marcus is here." "Good." "Lewis, I want you to know that calling me took tremendous courage. Can you tell me what's been happening?" For the next hour, Lewis told Father Michael everything. About the panic attacks that had been getting worse for years. About feeling empty even when he won races. About the pressure and the loneliness and the constant fear of disappointing everyone. He told him about punching the mirror the night before. Father Michael listened without judgment, asking gentle questions, but never making Lewis feel crazy or weak. "Lewis," Father Michael said when Lewis finished, "what you're describing sounds like depression and anxiety. These are real medical conditions, not character flaws. And they're treatable. But I'm a racing driver," Lewis said. "I'm supposed to be mentally strong." "You are mentally strong," Father Michael replied. "You've been fighting this battle alone for years while performing at the highest level of your sport. That takes incredible strength. But now it's time to get some help with the fight." Father Michael explained that he worked with a therapist named Dr. Sarah Williams who specialized in high-performance athletes dealing with mental health challenges. "She understands the unique pressures that elite athletes face," Father Michael said. "And everything you discuss with her would be completely confidential." Lewis felt a small spark of hope for the first time in months. Would she really understand? About the racing, the pressure, all of it. She's worked with Olympic athletes, professional footballers, tennis players, people who face the same kind of scrutiny and expectations you do. You wouldn't be her first client dealing with these issues. After hanging up, Lewis sat quietly with Marcus. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something else, relief. Relief that he had finally told someone the truth. Relief that he wasn't alone anymore. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked. "Scared," Lewis admitted, "but also lighter somehow. Like I've been carrying this huge weight and finally set it down." Father Michael had arranged for Lewis to meet Dr. Williams the following week when he returned to England. Lewis felt nervous about it, but also curious. What would it be like to talk to someone who really understood? Meeting Dr. Williams Dr. Sarah Williams's office in London was nothing like Lewis had expected. It wasn't sterile or intimidating. Instead, it felt warm and safe, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Dr. Williams was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a calming presence. She didn't look surprised to see a Formula One driver in her office, which helped Lewis relax. A little. "Thank you for coming, Lewis," she said as they settled into chairs. "I know this took courage." "Father Michael said you work with athletes," Lewis said. "I do. I understand that the pressures you face are different from what most people experience. The constant scrutiny, the expectation to be perfect, the way your entire identity can become tied to your performance." Lewis felt understood in a way he hadn't experienced in years. "Everyone thinks because I'm successful, I should be happy all the time. Depression doesn't work that way," Dr. Williams explained. "It's not about your circumstances. It's about brain chemistry, stress responses, sometimes genetics. You can have everything you've ever wanted and still feel empty inside." She explained that what Lewis was experiencing was very real and very treatable. Depression was like any other medical condition. It needed proper care. "But what if people find out?" Lewis asked. "What if McLaren thinks I'm not mentally strong enough for Formula One?" "Lewis, getting treatment for depression takes more strength than hiding it," Dr. Williams said. "And legally, they can't discriminate against you for seeking mental health care. This is about your health, not your job performance." They talked for an hour about Lewis's symptoms, his family history, and how long he had been struggling. Dr. Williams explained different treatment options, including therapy and medication, if needed. "The panic attacks, the emptiness after victories, the difficulty sleeping, these are all symptoms we can work on together," she said. For the first time in years, Lewis felt hope that things could actually get better. The championship battle continues. Lewis began seeing Dr. Williams weekly while continuing to race. They worked on understanding his depression and developing coping strategies for the enormous pressure he faced. The 2008 season started, and Lewis was determined to win his first world championship. But now he approached racing differently. Dr. Williams had helped him understand that his worth as a person wasn't determined by race results. "You are not just a racing driver," she reminded him during one session. "You're a complete person who happens to be very good at driving race cars." Lewis learned breathing techniques to help with panic attacks. He practiced mindfulness to stay present instead of worrying about future races or past mistakes. Most importantly, he began to separate his identity from his performance. The championship battle with Felipe Massa was intense all season long. Lewis faced criticism, mechanical failures, and incredible pressure. But with Dr. Williams's help and his support network of Father Michael and Marcus, he handled setbacks differently. When Lewis had a panic attack before the British Grand Prix, he didn't hide it. Instead, he used the techniques Dr. Williams had taught him and quietly asked Father Michael for support. They spent 10 minutes together in a quiet corner of the McLaren garage, using the breathing exercises Lewis had learned. By race time, Lewis felt centered and ready. He didn't win the race, but he drove brilliantly and felt proud of how he had handled the pressure. That night, he called Dr. Williams to talk through the experience. "I'm starting to understand that I can have difficult moments without them defining me," Lewis told her. "That's exactly right," Dr. Williams replied. "You're learning to be compassionate with yourself." Lewis's relationships began to improve too. He opened up to Sarah about his struggles, and she was more supportive than he had expected. Marcus noticed his friend seemed more like his old self, still serious about racing, but lighter somehow. Even Anthony saw changes in his son. Lewis seemed calmer, more grounded. The angry, depressed teenager who used to punch walls after bad races had grown into a young man who could accept both success and failure. "You seem different," Anthony observed one evening after a race weekend. "More peaceful." Lewis smiled. "I'm learning to be okay with who I am, even when I'm not perfect." Father Michael became a regular presence at races, providing quiet spiritual support without judgment. Lewis appreciated having someone there who understood his journey from darkness toward light. The 2008 season was building toward its dramatic conclusion, but Lewis felt ready for whatever came next. Win or lose, he was finally learning that his value didn't depend on championship trophies. He was learning to be human, and that was the most important victory of all. The 2008 Formula One season had been a roller coaster of emotions, but Lewis felt different now. Sitting in Dr. Williams's office after the Canadian Grand Prix, He reflected on how much had changed since he first walked through her door 8 months earlier. "How are you feeling about the championship fight?" Dr. Williams asked. Lewis was leading Felipe Massa by just 2 points with 7 races remaining. In the past, that kind of pressure would have sent him into a spiral of panic attacks and sleepless nights. "Nervous," Lewis admitted. "But it's a different kind of nervous now. It's excitement mixed with nerves, not pure terror." Dr. Williams smiled. "That's a healthy response to a high-pressure situation. What's different about how you're handling it?" "I remember what you taught me," Lewis said. "I'm still a worthwhile person whether I win the championship or not. My value doesn't depend on race results." It had taken months of therapy for that lesson to really sink in. There were still difficult days, moments when the old patterns of thinking tried to creep back. But Lewis now had tools to recognize and manage those thoughts. The British Grand Prix at Silverstone was a perfect example. Racing in front of his home crowd, Lewis felt enormous pressure to win. During the driver's briefing on race morning, familiar signs of panic began to surface. His heart started racing. His palms got sweaty. The room felt too small and too bright. But instead of hiding in a bathroom and suffering alone like he used to, Lewis quietly asked Father Michael for help. "Can we talk for a few minutes?" Lewis whispered. Father Michael nodded, and they found a quiet corner away from the other drivers and media. Lewis used the breathing techniques Dr. Williams had taught him: slow, deep breaths while focusing on the present moment instead of worrying about what might happen during the race. "I'm having a panic attack," Lewis said simply, "but I know what to do now." Father Michael sat with him, providing calm support while Lewis worked through the episode. After 10 minutes, Lewis felt centered and ready to race. That he didn't win the British Grand Prix. Massa took the victory that day. But Lewis finished second and felt proud of how he had handled the pressure. In the past, not winning at home would have devastated him. Now he could appreciate a good drive even without victory. After the race, Lewis called Dr. Williams from his hotel room. "I had a panic attack before the race," he told her. "But I handled it. I used the techniques we practiced, and I asked for help when I needed it." "How does that feel?" Dr. Williams asked. "Empowering," Lewis said, surprising himself with the word. "I felt like I was in control of my response instead of being controlled by my anxiety." Opening up to others, Lewis's growing emotional health began to strengthen his relationships. He had always been close to Marcus, but now their friendship deepened. As Lewis became more honest about his struggles, during a visit to Marcus's apartment in London, they sat on the couch playing video games like they had as teenagers. But their conversation was more mature now. "You seem like yourself again," Marcus observed. "I mean, the real you, not the racing driver version." Lewis paused the game and looked at his oldest friend. "I feel like myself again. For the first time in years, I feel like Lewis the person, not just Lewis the driver." "What's the difference?" Marcus asked. Lewis thought for a moment. Lewis the driver was always performing, always trying to be perfect, always afraid of disappointing people. Lewis the person is allowed to have bad days and make mistakes and still be okay. Lewis had also opened up to Sarah about his depression and therapy. She had been more understanding than he expected, and their relationship grew stronger as a result. "I wish you had told me sooner," Sarah said during dinner one evening. "I could see you were struggling, but I didn't know how to help." "I didn't know how to let you help," Lewis replied. "I thought admitting I had problems would make me seem weak." "Getting help made you stronger," Sarah said. "I can see the difference in how you handle stress now." Even Anthony noticed changes in his son. Lewis seemed calmer during race weekends, less likely to get frustrated with mechanical problems or disappointing results. "You're handling this season differently," Anthony observed after a particularly challenging race weekend in Germany. "I'm learning that racing is what I do, not who I am," Lewis explained. "Dad, I want to thank you for all your sacrifices over the years. But I also want you to know that your love and support shouldn't depend on whether I win races." Anthony was quiet for a moment, then hugged his son. "I'm proud of you no matter what happens on the track," he said. "I always have been." The Monaco breakthrough. The Monaco Grand Prix held special meaning for Lewis. It was where he had crashed 2 years earlier, leading to one of his darkest periods. Now, returning to the narrow streets of Monte Carlo, Lewis felt different. During practice, Lewis was fast and confident. The panic that used to overwhelm him in Monaco's claustrophobic environment was manageable now. He qualified well and felt genuinely excited about the race. On race day, Lewis drove brilliantly. He navigated the narrow streets with precision and confidence, eventually finishing on the podium. But the real victory wasn't the trophy, it was how he felt about himself. Standing on the Monaco podium, champagne spraying around him, Lewis felt genuine joy for the first time in years. Not the hollow satisfaction of performing well, but actual happiness about what he had accomplished. That evening, Lewis walked alone through the streets of Monaco. 2 years ago, he had sat in his hotel room after crashing, feeling hopeless and alone. Now he felt peaceful and grateful. Lewis pulled out his phone and called Dr. Williams, even though it was late. "I wanted to tell you something," he said when she answered. "Today at Monaco, I felt truly happy. Not because I had to be happy or because people expected me to be happy. I was genuinely happy." "That's wonderful, Lewis," Dr. Williams said. "How does that feel?" "Like I'm finally living my life instead of just surviving it," Lewis replied. He walked back to his hotel with a lightness in his step that had been missing for years. The Monaco harbor sparkled under the evening lights, and for the first time, Lewis felt like he belonged in this beautiful, successful world he had worked so hard to reach. That night, Lewis wrote in his journal, "Today I felt truly happy at a race. For the first time since I was a kid. Not the fake happiness I've been showing everyone, but real joy. Therapy is working. I'm learning to be okay with who I am, the good parts and the difficult parts. I'm learning that it's okay to have mental health struggles and still be successful. That I used to think that winning would fix everything that was wrong with me. Now I understand that I had to fix what was wrong with me to truly enjoy winning. I'm not cured." Dr. Williams says depression is something I'll always need to manage. But I have tools now. I have help. I have hope for the first time in years. I'm excited about the future, not terrified of it. Lewis closed the journal and looked out at the Monaco skyline. The championship battle with Massa would continue for several more months. There would be more pressure, more challenges, more difficult moments. But Lewis finally felt equipped to handle whatever came next. He was learning to be fully human, with all the struggles and joys that came with it. And that felt like the most important victory of his life. November 2008. São Paulo, Brazil. The final race of the Formula One season. Lewis Hamilton sat in his McLaren, waiting on the starting grid at Interlagos. The Brazilian crowd was enormous and passionate, their cheers echoing across the circuit. Lewis needed to finish fifth or better to win his first world championship. But for the first time in his racing career, Lewis felt genuinely calm before such a crucial moment. The night before the race, Lewis had called Dr. Williams from his hotel room. It had become a routine before important races, not because he was falling apart, but because talking through his feelings helped him stay centered. "How are you feeling about tomorrow?" Dr. Williams had asked. "Nervous, but excited," Lewis replied honestly. "A year ago, this kind of pressure would have sent me into a panic spiral. Now I feel ready." "What's different?" she asked. Lewis thought for a moment. "I know that whether I win or lose tomorrow, I'm still the same person. I'm still worthy of love and respect. The championship would be amazing, but it doesn't define who I am." Dr. Williams smiled through the phone. "That's exactly the mindset that will serve you well, no matter what happens." Now, sitting on the grid with the championship within reach, Lewis remembered those words. He looked around at the other cars surrounding him. Felipe Massa was starting from pole position, needing to win the race to have any chance of beating Lewis to the title. Lewis closed his eyes for a moment and used the breathing techniques he had learned. Slow, deep breaths. Focus on the present moment. Trust in his preparation and abilities. His race engineer's voice crackled through the radio. "Radio check, Lewis." "Copy," Lewis replied, his voice steady and calm. "Let's do this." The race of his life, the formation lap began, and Lewis followed the field around the track. The Brazilian sky was gray and threatening. Rain could come at any moment, making the race even more unpredictable. As the cars lined up for the start, Lewis felt that familiar pre-race energy building. But instead of panic, it was focused excitement. He was exactly where he belonged, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The 5 red lights appeared above the track. Point 5 lights, point 4 lights, point 3 lights, point 2 lights, point 1 light. Lights out. Lewis got a decent start, and settled into 6th position as they charged toward the first corner. Massa had gotten away well from pole position and was leading the race. Lewis needed to stay calm and work his way forward. For the first part of the race, everything went according to plan. Lewis picked off cars one by one, moving up to 5th place, exactly where he needed to be to win the championship. But then the rain started to at first. It was just a light drizzle. But as the laps ticked by, the track became more and more slippery. Cars began sliding off the racing line. Some drivers spun or crashed as they struggled with the difficult conditions. Lewis felt confident in the wet. He had always been good in the rain, able to find grip where others couldn't. As other drivers struggled, Lewis actually gained positions, moving up to 4th place. With 20 laps to go, Lewis was right where he needed to be. The championship was within his grasp, but then everything started going wrong. Sebastian Vettel, driving for Toro Rosso, was flying in the wet conditions. He caught and passed Lewis, dropping the McLaren driver back to 5th place. Still okay for the championship, but now Lewis had no margin for error. Then disaster struck. With just 5 laps remaining, Timo Glock's Toyota caught and passed Lewis. On the outside of a corner, Lewis was now in 6th place, one position away from losing the championship to Massa in previous years. This kind of pressure would have mentally destroyed Lewis. He would have panicked, made desperate moves, probably crashed trying to force his way past Glock. But Dr. Williams had taught him to stay present in difficult moments. Father Michael had shown him how to find calm in chaos. Marcus had reminded him that his worth didn't depend on any single race result. Lewis stayed patient. He studied Glock's car ahead of him, looking for an opportunity. The Toyota was struggling on worn tires in the increasingly wet conditions. If Lewis could just stay close, an opportunity might come. His team's radio crackled with updates from around the track. Massa was winning the race, which meant Lewis absolutely had to finish 5th or the championship would slip away. With 3 laps to go, Lewis was still stuck behind Glock. The tension was unbearable for everyone watching, but Lewis felt surprisingly calm. He had done everything he could. Whatever happened now was out of his control. Whatever happens, happens, Lewis thought to himself. I've done my best, and that's enough. The final moments as they started the final lap, Lewis could see that Glock's Toyota was really struggling. The German driver was on the wrong tires for the wet conditions and was sliding around more and more. Lewis caught up to Glock on the main straight. They were side by side as they approached the final sector of corners. This was Lewis's chance, but instead of making a desperate lunge that might have ended in disaster, Lewis waited for the right moment. He used his experience in wet conditions and his superior tire grip to get a better exit from the previous corner. As they approached the final chicane, Lewis was alongside Glock. The Brazilian crowd was on its feet, sensing that the championship might be decided in these final moments. Lewis pulled ahead just as they crossed the finish line. 5th place. The championship. Lewis Hamilton, you are the 2008 world champion, came his engineer's voice over the radio. But even in that moment of ultimate triumph, Lewis felt different than he had expected. Yes, there was joy and excitement and relief. But underneath it all was a deeper satisfaction, the knowledge that he had achieved his dream while staying true to himself. Lewis climbed out of his car in the Sao Paulo pit lane, still not quite believing what had happened. His father, Anthony, was there, tears streaming down his face. They embraced, and Lewis felt genuine gratitude for all the sacrifices his father had made. "We did it, Dad," Lewis said, his own tears flowing freely. "You did it," Anthony replied. "I'm so proud of you." Sarah was there too, beaming with pride. Marcus had flown to Brazil just to be there for this moment. Even Father Michael had made the trip, standing quietly in the background with his gentle smile. The media chaos that followed was intense, but Lewis handled it with a calmness that surprised everyone. He answered questions thoughtfully, thanked his team and family, and spoke about the long journey that had brought him to this moment. But he didn't mention the therapy, the panic attacks, or the years of struggling with depression. That story wasn't ready to be told yet. That night, alone in his hotel room, Lewis opened his journal and wrote, "World champion. I can barely believe it's real. But the amazing thing is that winning the championship feels different than I thought it would. It's wonderful, of course, but it doesn't feel like it's supposed to fix everything about my life or make me a different person. I'm still me, Lewis Hamilton, the person who sometimes struggles with anxiety and depression. But I'm also Lewis Hamilton, the person who learned to ask for help and take care of his mental health. A year ago, I thought this championship would be the thing that finally made me happy. Now I know that learning to be okay with myself was what made me happy. The championship is just a beautiful bonus that I hope someday I can tell this story. Maybe it would help other people who are struggling. Like I was. Lewis closed the journal and looked around his hotel room. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new pressures, new opportunities to use the mental health tools he had learned. But tonight, Lewis Hamilton was exactly where he belonged, not just as a world champion, but as a complete human being who had found his way back from darkness. The championship trophy sat on his desk, gleaming under the hotel room light. It was beautiful and meaningful and something he would treasure forever. But the real trophy, his mental health, his authentic relationships, his ability to be genuinely happy, was something no one could ever take away. The championship celebration in Brazil lasted well into the night, but Lewis found himself stepping away from the party early. Not because he wasn't happy, he was genuinely thrilled about winning his first world title. But he needed a quiet moment to process what had really happened. Lewis walked onto the hotel balcony overlooking Sao Paulo. The city lights twinkled below him like stars. In his hand, he held his phone with Dr. Williams's number ready to dial. "I hope I'm not calling too late," Lewis said when she answered. "Never too late for news like this," Dr. Williams replied warmly. "How does it feel to be world champion?" Lewis was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "Amazing, but also different than I expected." "How so?" 2 years ago, I thought winning this championship would fix everything wrong with me," Lewis said. "I thought it would make the depression disappear and finally make me truly happy. But now I realize I had to fix what was wrong with me first, to truly enjoy winning it." Dr. Williams smiled through the phone. "That's a profound insight, Lewis. You've learned the difference between external validation and internal peace." "I feel proud of the championship," Lewis continued. "But I feel even more proud of the work we've done together. Learning to manage my anxiety, understanding my depression, building real relationships with people. That feels like a bigger victory than any racing trophy." They talked for another 20 minutes about Lewis's journey from that first terrified phone call to father Michael to this moment of genuine triumph. When Lewis hung up, he felt grateful for all the people who had helped him find his way back to himself. Returning home back in England a week later, Lewis visited his old school, John Henry Newman. He had been invited to speak to the students about achieving your dreams. But as he walked through the familiar hallways, Lewis thought about sharing something deeper. The assembly hall was packed with teenagers who looked at Lewis with a mixture of awe and excitement. Here was someone from their neighborhood who had made it to the very top of the sporting world. Lewis spoke about hard work and dedication, about never giving up on your goals. The students listened intently, asking questions about racing and fame and what it was like to be world champion. But then a girl in the back row raised her hand. "Mr. Hamilton," she said quietly, "my mom says you must be the happiest person in the world now that you've won everything. But sometimes I feel really sad, even when good things happen to me. Is that normal?" The question hit Lewis like a lightning bolt. He saw himself in that young girl. The confusion about feeling empty when you should feel happy, the worry that something was wrong with you. Lewis looked out at the sea of young faces and made a decision that surprised even himself. "Can I tell you something honest?" he said, stepping closer to the students. "Winning the championship was amazing. But there were times in my career when I felt really sad and anxious, even when I was winning races." The hall became completely quiet. This wasn't what they had expected to hear from a world champion. "I thought if I just won enough trophies, the sadness would go away," Lewis continued. "But that's not how it works. I learned that it's okay to ask for help when you're struggling. It's okay to talk to someone about difficult feelings. Getting help doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger." The girl who had asked the question had tears in her eyes. Several other students were leaning forward, hanging on every word. "So to answer your question," Lewis said, looking directly at her, "yes, it's completely normal to feel sad sometimes, even when good things are happening. And there are people who can help you understand those feelings and deal with them." After the assembly, several students approached Lewis privately. They thanked him for being honest about mental health. Some shared their own struggles with anxiety and depression. I never thought someone successful like you could understand how I feel, one boy said. Success doesn't protect you from mental health challenges, Lewis replied. But getting help can teach you how to be successful and mentally healthy at the same time. A conversation with Marcus that evening, Lewis visited Marcus at his flat in London. They ordered Chinese takeout and settled onto the couch like they had countless times as teenagers. I heard about your speech at the school, Marcus said. Someone posted a video online. It's going viral. Lewis pulled out his phone and saw that. Clips of his comments about mental health were being shared across social media. The responses were overwhelmingly positive, people thanking him for his honesty, sharing their own stories, expressing gratitude that someone famous was talking openly about these issues. I didn't plan to say any of that, Lewis admitted. But when that girl asked her question, I couldn't give her a fake answer. How does it feel to have talked about it publicly? Marcus asked. Lewis thought for a moment. Scary but also liberating. I've been carrying this secret for so long, worried that people would think less of me if they knew I struggled with depression. But the response has been the opposite. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, eating their dinner and watching the London traffic outside Marcus's window. Do you remember that night in Budapest? Marcus asked eventually. When you called me after punching the mirror? Of course, Lewis said. I was terrified that night, Marcus admitted. Not just because you were hurt, but because I thought I might lose my best friend. I didn't know how to help you. Lewis looked at his oldest friend with gratitude. You did help me. You flew across Europe just to sit with me. You helped me see that I needed professional help. You probably saved my life. We saved each other, Marcus replied. That's what friends do. A letter to his younger self that night in his Monaco apartment, Lewis sat at his desk with a pen and paper. Inspired by the conversation with the students and the positive response to his honesty, he decided to write something he had never written before, a letter to his younger self. Dear Lewis at 14, I'm writing this letter from 2008. You're a world champion now, but that's not the most important thing I want to tell you. Right now, you're feeling scared and alone. You think there's something wrong with you because winning races doesn't make you as happy as everyone expects. You're having panic attacks and feeling empty inside, but you're hiding it because you think it makes you weak. I want you to know that you're not weak. You're not broken. You're dealing with depression and anxiety, which are real medical conditions that affect millions of people, including successful athletes. The loneliness you feel is real, but it won't last forever. You're going to find people who understand and care about you, not just Lewis the racing driver, but Lewis the person that you're going to learn that asking for help is the bravest thing you can do. You're going to meet a chaplain named Father Michael, who will see your pain and offer support without judgment. You're going to work with a therapist who will teach you that your worth doesn't depend on race results. Most importantly, you're going to learn that you can be successful and struggle with mental health at the same time. One doesn't cancel out the other. The racing will be amazing, better than you can imagine right now. But the real victory will be learning to be okay with who you are, anxiety and depression included, that you're going to help other people by sharing your story. That scared, lonely teenager reading this will grow up to make a difference in ways you can't imagine yet. Hold on. Get help. Trust that it gets better. With love and pride, Lewis, your future self. Lewis folded the letter and put it in his journal. Someday, maybe he would share it publicly. Maybe it would help other young people who were struggling the way he had. Father Michael's visita. A few days later, Father Michael stopped by Lewis's apartment for tea. The chaplain had been a quiet but constant presence throughout Lewis's journey, and their friendship had deepened over the months. I'm proud of what you said at the school, Father Michael said as they sat in Lewis's living room. It took courage to be that vulnerable in public. I kept thinking about that girl's question. Lewis replied. She reminded me of myself at that age, confused about why success didn't automatically equal happiness. You've come a long way from the broken young man I first met at Silverstone, Father Michael observed. Lewis nodded. Sometimes I think about that version of myself, so scared and angry and alone. I wish I could tell him that help was available, that he didn't have to suffer in silence. In a way, you just did, Father Michael said. Every young person who hears your story now knows that they're not alone, that successful people struggle, too, and that help is available. They talked about Lewis's plans for the future. Now that he was world champion, he had a platform that could reach millions of people around the world. I think I want to start a foundation, Lewis said. Something focused on mental health support for young athletes and people from disadvantaged backgrounds. That sounds perfect, Father Michael replied. You can use your experience to help others. Find the support they need. As Father Michael prepared to leave, he turned to Lewis with a gentle smile. Remember that day at Brands Hatch when I first gave you my card? He asked. How could I forget? Lewis said. I knew then that you had the strength to overcome your struggles. I just had to wait for you to see it too. Lewis hugged the man who had helped save his life. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for not giving up on yourself, Father. Michael replied. After Father Michael left, Lewis sat in his apartment, surrounded by racing trophies and championship memorabilia. They were beautiful and meaningful, symbols of years of hard work and dedication. But the real victory wasn't displayed on any shelf. It lived in his heart, in his mind, in his ability to wake up each morning and feel genuinely okay with who he was. Lewis Hamilton was a world champion. But more importantly, he was a person who had learned to live authentically, seek help when needed, and find joy in both success and struggle. That was a victory that would last a lifetime. Present day, 2024 Lewis Hamilton sat in a comfortable chair, in a quiet studio in London. Across from him, veteran sports journalist Caroline Williams waited patiently as the cameras rolled. At 39 years old, Lewis was now Sir Lewis Hamilton, a 7-time world champion, one of the greatest racing drivers in history. But today, he wasn't here to talk about racing records or championship victories. Lewis, Caroline began gently. You've had an incredible career spanning nearly 2 decades. But today you want to share a different story. Tell us why. Lewis took a deep breath. After years of keeping his mental health struggles private, he was finally ready to tell the complete truth. People always ask about the pressure of Formula One, Lewis said, his voice calm but filled with emotion. But the hardest battles I fought weren't on the racetrack. They were in my own mind, starting when I was just a teenager. Caroline nodded encouragingly. What do you mean by that? When I was 14, 15, 16 years old, I was winning races and getting opportunities that other young drivers could only dream of. Everyone thought I had the perfect life. But inside, I was struggling with severe depression and anxiety. I felt completely alone. The admission sent shockwaves through the motorsport world watching the interview live. Lewis Hamilton, the confident champion they had known for years, was revealing struggles that dated back to his teenage years. I had no one to talk to, Lewis continued, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of his words. I thought showing any weakness would end my career before it started. I was wrong about that. Lewis explained how the pressure to be perfect, combined with the isolation of being different, both racially and economically, from most people in his sport, had created a darkness he carried for years. The panic attacks started when I was about 14, he said. I would sit in my car before races, unable to breathe, feeling like I was going to die. But I learned to hide it so well that nobody knew. Caroline leaned forward with genuine concern. How did you manage to perform at such a high level while dealing with these struggles? I became very good at wearing a mask, Lewis admitted. I could smile for cameras, give perfect interviews, act like the confident young driver everyone expected me to be. But underneath, I was drowning. Lewis shared stories that had never been told before. The nights when he wrote in his journal about feeling worthless despite winning championships. The times he wondered if everyone would be better off without him. The constant fear that he was a fraud who would eventually be exposed. People saw the trophies and the success, Lewis said. But they didn't see me crying in hotel rooms. They didn't see the panic attacks. They didn't see how empty I felt even after winning races. The turning point, what changed? Caroline asked. How did you find your way out of that darkness? Lewis smiled, thinking of the people who had saved his life. There was a chaplain named Father Michael who had been quietly watching my career. He saw the signs that I was struggling, even when I thought I was hiding it perfectly. Lewis told the story of their first real conversation at Silverstone, how Father Michael had used the word depression for the first time in relation to what Lewis was experiencing. He gave me his business card and told me that if I ever wanted to talk to someone who wouldn't judge me, I should call him. I carried that card in my wallet for over a year before I was brave enough to use it. What made you finally make that call? Lewis was quiet for a moment, remembering that terrible night in Budapest when he had punched the mirror and cut his hand. I hit rock bottom, He said simply. I had a complete breakdown after a bad race in Hungary. I was alone in my hotel room, and I realized that if I didn't get help, I might not survive much longer. My friend Marcus flew from London to be with me, and together we called Father Michael. Lewis described meeting Dr. Sarah Williams, the therapist who specialized in working with high-performance athletes. He explained how she had helped him understand that depression was a medical condition, not a personal failing. She taught me that my worth as a person had nothing to do with my performance on the racetrack, Lewis said. That was revolutionary for me. I had tied my entire identity to winning races. The mystery revealed, there's something I want to share that I've never told publicly before, Lewis said, looking directly into the camera. That chaplain, Father Michael, who helped save my life. He had actually been watching me since I was 12 years old. Caroline looked surprised. What do you mean? Remember that first big karting championship I won at Hodgston when I was 12? I was crying after the race because winning felt so lonely. There was a man in the crowd who seemed to understand that I was struggling, even though we had never met. Lewis paused, letting the significance of this revelation sink in. That was Father Michael. He told me years later that he had recognized the signs of a young person in distress. He followed my career quietly, appearing at races, waiting for the right moment to offer help. The interviewer's eyes widened. He was watching over you for all those years. He saw what nobody else could see, that I was a kid who desperately needed someone to understand his pain. He waited patiently until I was ready to accept help. He literally saved my life. Lewis explained how Father Michael's intervention, combined with Marcus's unwavering friendship and Dr. Williams's professional expertise, had pulled him back from the brink. I learned that asking for help isn't giving up, Lewis said, looking directly into the camera. It's the strongest thing you can do. You don't have to carry your pain alone. The foundation. Lewis announced the launch of a new foundation focused on mental health support for young athletes and people from disadvantaged backgrounds. I want young people to know that mental health struggles don't disqualify you from achieving your dreams, he said. You can be successful and deal with depression at the same time. One doesn't cancel out the other. The foundation would provide free counseling services, mental health education, and support groups specifically for young athletes facing the unique pressures of competitive sports. If this interview helps even one young person realize they're not alone, that help is available, then sharing my story will have been worth it, Lewis said. Speaking to young people, Caroline asked Lewis what he would say to young people who might be watching and struggling with similar issues. Lewis leaned forward, speaking directly to the camera with the passion of someone who had lived through the darkness and found light on the other side. If you're a young person watching this and you feel the way I used to feel, alone, empty, like something is wrong with you even when everything looks perfect from the outside, please know that you're not broken. You're not weak. You're dealing with something real, and there are people who can help. His voice grew stronger as he continued. Mental health struggles don't make you less capable of achieving great things. Some of the strongest, most successful people in the world have dealt with depression and anxiety. The difference is learning to get the support you need. Lewis pulled out a worn piece of paper from his pocket. Father Michael's original business card, now yellowed with age. I kept this card for years before I was brave enough to use it, he said, holding it up to the camera. It represents the lifeline that was always there, waiting for me to grab it. Your lifeline is out there too. You just have to be brave enough to reach for it. A message of hope. The interview concluded with Lewis reading from his teenage journal, words of despair that he had transformed into a message of hope. That scared, lonely teenager who wrote these words grew up to achieve his dreams, Lewis said, his voice filled with emotion. But more importantly, he learned that he was enough, exactly as he was. And so are you. Lewis looked directly into the camera one final time. To every young person struggling with mental health, you are not alone. You are worthy of help. You are worthy of love. And you are capable of incredible things, mental health struggles and all. The interview ended, but Lewis's message continued to spread around the world. Social media exploded with responses from people sharing their own stories, thanking Lewis for his courage, and expressing hope that they too could find their way through the darkness. The school visit 1 week after the interview aired, Lewis returned to John Henry Newman School, his old secondary school in Stevenage. The assembly hall was packed with students, But the atmosphere was different from his championship celebration years earlier. This time, Lewis came not as a conquering hero, but as someone offering hope to those who felt hopeless. A young girl in the front row raised her hand during the question period. "Mr. Hamilton," she said quietly, "I saw your interview. I feel alone too sometimes, like you did. Really alone." Lewis smiled gently and walked closer to her. "Then let's talk about it," he said, "because you're not alone anymore. None of you are." For the next hour, Lewis led an honest conversation about mental health, sharing resources, contact information for counselors, and most importantly, the message that seeking help was a sign of strength, not weakness. As Lewis left the school that day, he felt a deep sense of purpose. His racing career had brought him fame and success. But this work, helping young people understand that they weren't alone in their struggles, felt like his most important victory yet. The scared, lonely 12-year-old who had cried after winning his first championship had grown up to become someone who could hold space for other scared, lonely young people. And that transformation from victim to healer was the greatest championship of Lewis Hamilton's extraordinary life. From a lonely 12-year-old hiding his pain behind racing victories to a world champion using his platform to break the stigma around mental health, Lewis's story reminds us that even our heroes face battles we can't see. His courage to speak up has already helped countless young people realize they're not alone in their struggles. We'd love to know. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let us know your city or country. If this story moved you or taught you something new, please give this video a like. It really helps us reach more people who might need to hear Lewis's message of hope. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring true stories like this one. We share powerful tales of resilience, courage, and the human spirit that remind us we're all capable of overcoming our darkest moments. Most importantly, please share this video with your friends and family. You never know who might be struggling in silence and need to hear that help is available, that they're not alone, and that asking for support is actually the strongest thing they can do. Together, we can spread kindness and awareness, one story at a time. Thank you for listening, and remember, you are enough, exactly as you are.